Hello, can everybody
Oh, there we go.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. Now I could see all the buttons. I couldn't see them earlier.
Okay.
Good to see you all.
Likewise. This must be us. We're here.
Yep.
All right. It is 4:03 and we're calling the meeting to order. I want to make note that the only member that is not here is Rob Taylor. He let me know ahead of time that he had another commitment, so he will not be here today. So we will now move on, noting that all members are present with the exception of Mr. Taylor. We will now move into oral communications. This is the opportunity to address the audit committee on any scheduled matter. Unless additional time is authorized by the committee, all commentaries shall be limited to 3 minutes per individual and no more than 15 minutes total. We don't have anyone here. Do we have anyone on virtually?
No, Your Honor.
Thank you so much. We'll now go into the scheduled matters.
Thank you, Your Honor. Just of significance to the committee, given its oversight of audits and its auditors. We received two subsequent audits since your the last meeting of this committee. The first was the Transportation Development Act Funds audit. This was done by Brown Armstrong, and it's done under contract of TCAG. So TCAG has the master audit agreement, and then they go out and audit the 8 cities in the county for its use of Transportation Development Act funds, and it's called TDA audit. You'll hear that reported to the TCAG board, and just as a report back to the committee that was found without any issues. That TDA audit now will be reported back to TCAG.
Right.
And the
Thank
and the TCTA, and that has to deal with Measure R funds and other transportation dollars received.
Thank you.
Thank you to member Bemis for good work as always.
Did Vice Mayor have any questions, or did Julia have any questions to the information? I didn't see anything, but
I don't have any questions on it, but good work. Thank you, Maria.
I don't have any questions either. Thank you.
I'm so happy she's sitting at the table, even though you probably can't see her. Okay.
I also would say, I think part of that is also the tracking of dollars through the departments, the different projects, right? And that the funds are being appropriately used.
Actually, it's just for the TDA funds, which we are reporting under the transit funds and the LTF funds. TDA funds are the LTF funds, and the STAA, State Transit Assistance Funds. And because of TCAG, we get Measure R. It's also part of the audit. And part of the audit also is looking at the fare box ratio for the transit.
Thank you very much. And we'll go on to the next item, the single audit report.
Right, and we spoke about this when last, I was gonna say Peak, yeah. I knew it was Jeff. I could. So your auditor provided a report. You might recall on the ACFR, and on the ACFR, and said that he had the single audit that he would be completing over the next month or so, and that has been subsequently completed, and a copy's been provided. And found again without any issues, no corrections. So the single audit of, and this is the of the enterprises. Is that the?
This is the audit of major federal grant awards.
Okay.
So, so there's a report in there that shows how much we spent during the year. I think it's about over 15 million. And so we submit the schedule of federal awards to the feds, the feds. And that's what the audit is for the federal grant awards.
Federal grant awards. So the takeaway from that is that again, the accounting of it was without correction. So another great job by Maria and her staff and tracking these costs and doing it correctly and not needing any corrections or having any any findings or anything like that. So with that, I think we're planning for Mr. Peak to present to the city council at the second meeting in May, which would then be of the city's aquifer and the single lot, and providing a report to the city council.
Thank you. I'm happy that it's going to come in May. I appreciate it, and I appreciate all the help and the work that you did to participate in that. I know you didn't do it alone. I know that you had people that were behind you in your department to gather the information. Doesn't go unnoticed, especially when it comes to the numbers. And especially when your audit reports come back and there are no findings and you can take a deep breath.
We are, speaking of another audit, we are this week undergoing what's called the FTA triennial audit, which is a little bit unique this year because of the TCRTA transition. So City of Porterville is being audited for the prior 3 years. This happens every 3 years. And it's a little unique in that, so it's a federal audit, which it's one of the most thorough audits you can undergo. It takes a lot of time. It started, there was a lot of it's quite the schedule, but just as an update to that, an audit activity, there's an exit interview tomorrow. Fortunately, the city's in good hands, given that Mr. Tree is participating as kind of in both roles as transit manager for the city for the time that was covered by the audit, as well as because we are transitioning July 1, at least that's the intent, is that the City of Porterville transit system will convert to the TCRTA. So the City of Porterville will no longer be no longer be subject to the triennial audit, but would be so under the TCRTA, if that makes sense. So Rich and Trisha Whiteley, who's our one of our accountants, and then Mike Knight and Russell Isom from the shop, because there's a lot of they review a lot of your maintenance and things of that nature. Plus, we've gone to partial electrification.
Yeah.
So that's also something new. So there's just a lot of new items that are, I will tell you, the FTA was very impressed by the City of Porterville in terms of, as a small agency, not, and again, these are folks that are Western United States representatives. These aren't, they're just coming away saying, you know, you guys are so advanced, but with that comes a little bit of, you know, making sure, given we're the first ones we're first ones riding the surf, you know, did we find any coral? So I know it's been a little stressful this week with the triennial audit going on, and it's virtual. So that also makes it even more difficult than having them here and trying to send documentation back and forth and things like that. So, so just thought I'd provide that update, kind of in line with the audits that the FTA audit is underway this week with a report. Ultimately, I would say come back to the city, to this committee, probably August, September, I think, because there's going to be there's going to be a letter, a draft that we then respond to. The irony is that once it's done, it will be TCRTA's responsibility going forward. So that just thought it's just kind of interesting when you look backwards and then look forwards. So sorry to kind of explain that, but it is unique, and even they acknowledge it. But very supportive as well. Very, very supportive of the city's efforts in transit.
That transit, the subject of transit is, especially with transportation and the transit, the electrification, and all the projects that come underneath it, especially for the FTA. It's kind of a little stressful because it's not.
I'll give you one example. I know I've used this before. In a prior FTA triennial audit, they found issue. Now, remember, they're FTA.
Mhm.
They took issue with federal CMAQ-funded buses receiving fueling CNG in FTA-funded canopies, because they were not FTA funded, they were FHWA funded. Now, mind you, they're both under the Department of Transportation, but
Correct.
different. So this would be like, the city having issue that the fire department was getting fueled up at the police station. You're like, wait a minute, we all work for the same city. It's all the same color money, but it's not the same department.
Oh,
So
they come from criteria.
yeah, so, and we've worked through some of that.
Criteria, yeah.
And TCAG's been good about helping with that, but it is a very scrutinized audit, and one that is not fun to go through every 3 years.
Right, and it's the criteria that sometimes becomes the stress more than the appropriation. So, thank you very much for that.
Any other questions about audits, or Maria's here? Anything you want to talk about audits?
Let's just ask her everything. No,
No, I
I'm
guess,
just kidding.
I guess it just speaks to Maria's.
No, it's true. Yeah, the whole department comes into play on this practice. Okay, thank you for that information. We look forward to getting that information at another meeting. And we'll now move on to the Barn Theater.
Well, yeah, invitations were extended to Debbie Saberhart and the Barn Theater to join you today in review of the agreement. Obviously not here and haven't been responsive to that. So I guess the question before the committee would be, and Donnie Moore is here, who, from a facility standpoint, this is one of the agreements that kind of is housed underneath Parks and Leisure Services. The property outside, so their agreement is unique in that the city, it's a land lease. So the city owns the land, which is under a reversionary clause. This was property that was donated to the city back in the day, essentially as part of the Murray, we'll call it the Murray family, which has a reversion that should it not be used. Sometimes you'll hear, well, the city should just sell it or whatever. It cannot. It has a reversion to it. And actually there's a family member up in Fresno who's a judge, I believe, that you would probably end up having to get involved. So in the end, it's city property that's under a reversion. And then the Barn Theater owns their facility. And
You know what's weird though, John? Looking at the license agreement, that's not really that clear. It sounds like any other license agreement. Yeah, I mean, I was just looking at it for that because I know we've always said that, but I'm looking at it and it doesn't read that way. It reads real property together with improvements thereon. Now, there may be separate independent documentation and the license just doesn't reflect that. But we should probably track that down if that's the case.
What number is that on, Julia?
Well, that's my point. It's not in there at all. It doesn't even refer to the building as being
okay.
separate. It's the absence of the information that is the issue. It reads like a standard license agreement. So, yeah, I don't see where it actually calls out that they own the building.
Oh, in this agreement, that's.
Not in this agreement. Now, it doesn't mean there isn't one somewhere else, but this agreement doesn't read that way. So we would probably need to, that would be something, I was looking at this earlier for just housekeeping purposes because I knew we were reviewing it today. And I think one of the things we should do is clear that up and figure it out. And if it is the case, we need to be more clear in the license agreement. This one, let me see how old this is.
This was the one that.
It wasn't that far. See, this is we did this in 2017,
Right.
but I don't know how much we actually changed it. I'd have to go back and look. I did not pull the older versions of it to see what we have on file. So I should probably do that. Because maybe, I'm guessing when I did the changes to this, we just, borrowed from the prior agreements. So it's probably, I would imagine it's been that way. I don't, but I'd have to go back and look and trace the history of it. And if
Maybe
they
I'm
do own it, there should be some verification of that.
Mhm.
So, because even if you look at the very end of it, it's like when it talks about what happens at the end, they surrender the premises and the improvements to us on number 23.
Maybe the oral history is wrong.
Well, that's the thing. Yeah. So, and I don't know enough about it to know. I just, it just occurred to me when I'm like, haven't we always said that we only own the real it's like a land lease, but it doesn't read like a land lease at all. In fact, it's a license agreement, which by virtue of what it is, doesn't even, it's a, it would be weird to have a land license agreement for a structure owned by somebody anyways. I mean, you would do, when you really want to do a land lease. I know that we use license because of the issue with the 90-day termination clauses that we have to put in things. But that would be my first suggestion is we need to look at the history and see what actually is going on here. Maybe they think they own it. Maybe they do own it. Maybe they, but it is a little bit odd. So, or maybe somebody back in the day, represented that to them, but I don't know that that's the, a representation isn't enough to convey ownership. So of the building.
And that would be.
Or maybe it was that way and then they didn't want the responsibility and it converted at some point. So.
So when you read number 1, that is the real. It doesn't.
Real
talk about
property includes, but realize real property is the way we use those terms when we're talking about real property with homes on it or with a business on it. So we don't ever refer to buildings as personal property unless you have a land use lease situation where you make that very clear. So this reads just like a standard. Real property is just the description of the parcel.
It's just the legal description of that piece.
Yeah,
of
it's just the legal
property.
description of the parcel. We don't include improvements and we talk about that anyways.
I guess this goes. I mean, you raise.
Sorry to throw a
I
huge
say I
wrench
learn
in
something every day here, even though I've been here probably too long now. So, when you hear something and then you read it in the context that you've heard it, it's interesting that you say that now. So my understanding of this is that the property had been donated and then there had been an effort. I mean, we're going to have to pull the history on this.
Yeah.
About the construction of the facility and for the purposes to which the city allowed the land to be improved upon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which is not much different. I mean, that's probably customary, right, Julia? So if you have city property that then the improvements are made upon, if the property is not purchased, then the improvements carry with the property.
Right.
Well,
Yeah. So I don't know. I would really, I'm this is really curious to me. I don't know where that came from and if it's verifiable or if it's a misconception or because even if that was the intention, I'm not sure the things were done to even make that so we're separated out. So we just have to look. Anyway, so.
I have a question.
Yeah, please go ahead.
So, and this may be what John just brought up and Julia spoke to, but under the witness, whereas the licensor is the owner of the described real property. Is that stating they're the owner of the property? Or is that us?
We're the licensor.
Okay. Okay, got it. So
I know, I keep
then,
looking like, what am I missing? Is it somewhere? here?
yeah,
I'm like trying to find it because I'm like, maybe I'm just missing because and then I'm like, well,
I mean, I've read this agreement a number of times and always read it in that context. So now you've kind of wobbled me a bit.
yeah,
sorry.
me too, because I read it before and, but I mean, that's a basic note that we need to be aware of. So I think it's still good, Julia, that, I mean, we
Yeah.
need to resolve that before anything, I think. So I'm glad you did bring it up.
I want to ask a question. Since we're talking about history of this item, and in the process of having these agreements signed and executed by the people who are, was there ever, do we know, a legal representation on their behalf when these documents were done?
I believe so, because Vanderhorst was the attorney at the time. I do recall that, and Nikki Edwards was the president.
And what's here, the only thing where would their history be now with the new board, and if they would have that information? And as you recall, when we met back here, it was about getting the documents and not knowing who did what in the past.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I think what we need to look at is what the record shows at the time that they built it, the theater, right? Because I take it we didn't build it, right? They built it, and so that's where we need to look at what the record said and what documentation was done back then at the time of the building of it. Because this really doesn't read, I mean, this reads, it even says that we're licensing the real property together with the appurtenances thereon. I mean, to me, that is just typical language for, licensing the property and the buildings that are on it. So, theoretically, we wouldn't need to license something we don't own. So,
All right, so Fernando will have a fishing expedition to see if we can come across.
How far back?
Oh, goodness.
That's a good question. I mean, is there like a?
This is gonna go back to the 40s, 50s.
when was it built?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'll look in the basement, Fernando, see what we have.
And I'll see what I got up here.
This is the list of
I mean, I could check all, well, if it was
But-
donated, wouldn't that have gone to like city council as an item?
Yeah.
So I think kind of going back on those minutes and of just fishing through there would kind of give us a time frame.
And would it be good to reach out to their board to see if they have any documents, just to give the opportunity for them to see? I mean, Fernando is probably going to be more successful, but
It's up to you. I mean, do we want to figure out what we have on our side first before we
I think
approach
we
that
need to
subject?
do
I mean,
that.
this is a public record meeting, so it's not like it's
I think
out there.
okay.
I think we need to gather the information. I think the
What's in our
information
records?
gathered,
Mhm.
and then
Okay.
we engage in the dialogue. Then,
Okay.
oh. Is there anything, Donnie, you would like to say to this regard?
Yeah, Donnie, any improvements you would make in the agreement, kind of off the top of your head, or from that it might?
Not really as far as the verbiage goes. It's just, like we've always talked about, the communication is just the biggest issue, just knowing kind of what they're planning on doing prior to them doing it. Because, the agreement speaks to everything from, signage on the property to not doing for-profit events to different things that have popped up in the past that, we weren't aware of until after or whatever. So communication on my end is just like the biggest part, at least for me, just so I know what's going on, because they haven't really been in the greatest discussion, before things happen. It's always after we hear something is going to happen, then I'll reach out or, we'll try to find out what's going on. But that's the biggest thing. But as far as the agreement wording and everything itself, no, I think we're,
There was something I was going to bring up because I looked at the utility accounts. And it looks like the city is paying for the landscape meters or watering over there instead of.
them.
And I wasn't sure if that's correct or if we're supposed to, or.
In here, it says the utilities is on them. I think,
Yeah,
doesn't
there
it?
was-
Is it-
I
well,
actually
there's a-
found 2 accounts
Um,
that the city's paying aside from what they're paying.
Because it said red.
Well, they have a certain responsibility in proximity to the building, or to that property is what it says.
Well, the part on number 13, like the city, like we have the turf, the parking lot, and putting out the trees, but the utilities is specifically in here as well. Let's see, where is
Yeah, we have a prohibition on sub-licensing of the buildings or facilities
11?
that they're using. You know, what I mean, everything in here that would speak to the opposite of them owning the building, but we should probably. Yeah, and then, yeah, utilities, it looks like they're supposed to be covering those.
Number 11, yeah, it says
Yeah.
they have electric, power, water, gas, telephone, garbage removal, so they're on all that.
But does that, I guess this becomes a question, does that encompass the entire property? Or, this question was raised to me about the Boy Scouts building as an example, which is on city property, but not aware of any agreement for its use. I mean, and unfortunately, there's a lot of history here that there just isn't documented. Like, where did that building come from? There's a building on the back side of, so under the Barton Theater to the north, there's a building in the back, which is called the Boy Scouts building, which used to be at Veterans Park, but they vacated it to go there. And then that's where now Kiwanis.
Kiwanis.
That used to be the Boy Scouts building, and now they have occupy a building on city property, which we don't have an agreement for.
So is that property also part of the whole Barn Theater?
So there's a separate parcel called, I don't think so. So this goes to the vegetable garden, as we call it. So there's the unimproved part of Murray Park that is not under a reversion. We actually own it, and we could sell it. In fact, that came up as a potential site for the DA's building. There had been some conversation about developing before they did at the corner. They actually looked at potentially purchasing it from the city for the development of what's now Cornerstone.
You mentioned something about vegetables. I was thinking of looking at some of our old records. There's something in our records that has a note about the vegetable. I was wondering if I'll look at it.
So the utility coverage requirement would apply to the premises, and the premises are defined as that real property parcel that's described in anything on it. So if the watering is occurring, any watering occurring on that part, on that described real property in the license agreement would be arguably their responsibility as it currently reads.
All right, so we'll look at what, if there is a part, if that has been, I doubt it's been parcelized because, there's a whole list of things, obviously, we need to bring back in this consideration.
Yeah, this
Yeah.
things that have map with site.
Diagram.
Yeah.
This was a good one to pick for housekeeping for review because
I agree.
it has a lot of
I
housekeeping.
agree.
Well, we should probably talk about what's interesting is that the Boy Scout buildings I think it's on a separate parcel. I think the parcel ends, I've seen this before. It ends on the north end of the Barn Theater, and then the other part wraps around the hill and goes back up to, what's the back road there? Is that Park Drive on the east that separates Murray Park and the unimproved part?
Park and Corona.
Corona.
Corona
Right.
goes into that.
Thanks, Julia. That's why we have this committee, because we can sit down and dissect an agreement and go, all right, let's just start at the very fundamentals of this.
Another reason.
Yeah, yeah. Fernando says, thanks, Julia. So we need to put together the history behind its construction, the terms of its dedication is what I would say.
Yeah,
I know that the agreement was redone in 17 because they said that at that time they had benefactors that would only donate if they had a longer term for a surety of operations. And so we did extend the term, and then those improved, it didn't happen. So.
yeah, I mean, we have a very explicit clause in here that says if they terminate and cancel, we get everything.
Without any compensation.
Full and complete title to all improvements, buildings, structures, fixtures, excluding trade fixtures, shall have then vested in licensor. So even to the extent that they do own it, you could argue that this agreement says that they don't anymore. So
And that was
I
legal counsel, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that agreement that got signed in 2017, even this one would have been seen by their legal counsel as well. They had.
Was Robert around in 2017 still? I don't remember.
I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, if they owned, there's no way with an attorney on the board, if they owned it, that I could imagine that he would have advised that they signed this the way it reads then, unless they didn't want to own it. Or they don't want to, they only want to own it as long as they have a license with the city. I don't know.
Yeah.
So congratulations, we may be the owners of a building that we didn't realize we own, for better or worse.
$1 for them to own it.
Oh, man.
Okay. We are going to bring this back once the history of the construction and everything else comes into play. And it'll be interesting for us to look at that. Before we would do the reach out to the board and see where it is this committee wants to go with it. Is there anything else we should be doing? Julia?
No, I'll look at my files too. I think I'd remember if we made a big change like that, but then again, you'd be surprised at what I forget these days. So I'll look and see what I have in the file. Just because I think the barn theater has come up from time to time. So I may have to go pull it out of storage, but.
I have some records as it relates to the reversion stuff, because this came up when I first became city manager, when we did the Henry Street Park acquisition. Because what was the ownership? Starting with so now I have to question everything that, my understanding is that what was under reversion was, it has to be used for parks purposes or community. See, this is the interesting part, is I think it's under the same reversion clause the golf course has and the Murray Park pool and Murray Park, as is the barn theater. It's all considered, it's all part of the same property, but there was a piece in the middle that was not part of that reversion. We own it. Now you're causing me to, okay.
Opening a major can of worms here, I guess. Yeah.
No, but if it's going to be looked at and if it's something that has to be done, then it should be done at this time. I mean, so that it
Yeah.
can be approached. And thank you, Julia, for all this information that you've given us this afternoon.
The good news is the license agreement itself is decent, all because it was just done in 2017. So there, I mean, other than some changes that the Barn Theater may be wanting, it's not like there's a lot to do with it otherwise. It's just we got to figure this big question out. So
Correct.
Yeah.
Council, Vice Mayor, is there anything that you might want to add to what we're doing here?
Nothing to add. I just see, it'll be interesting to get the information back.
Okay. See, they're smiling. They're virtual up there.
I wanted to come actually, but it's been crazy. I just can't get enough out. I don't have enough hours in the day right now.
We understand. We just had that conversation. We understand that. Okay. So that is where we're going. Let me make this question. Since we're already going to be bringing this back at a meeting, shall we hold off onto other contracts? Or do we even want to anticipate a future contract while this is being looked at?
I think that would probably go to the staff. You mean, either bring this back at our next meeting in a month? Or do we need more time for the Barn Theater?
We can bring this back, but in question to your other agreements, do we have any that we are? Because I said it would be good for this committee to review any agreements before we renew them. Do we have any that are in the queue right now?
Right now, I don't believe any like coming up soon here.
Okay, so that was gonna be my only, if we had one, because I don't want to put an agreement on,
Correct.
I would say, I don't know. There was that whole list. I don't want one of them to come up for renewal
Right.
and not have been renewed.
Right.
But
I'll double check, but
Well, do you guys want to put one more agreement on, like maybe do this and maybe the Commission agreement or something, just to get that ball rolling, just in case? I don't know how much we're going to have to talk about on the Barn Theater. It's kind of an open question, or we can play it by ear. We can see staff can see what they're getting and then decide if it makes sense to calendar more than one agreement. review.
I think it would be good to have one on deck all the time to start into the next one, just in case.
Commission. We need to probably look at that one. Okay. I know that June is a busy month for several of you.
Mhm.
And I know with the graduations and with everything that is coming forth, I'm looking at the very last week of June. And I don't know what you would think, but I'm looking at, I know Tuesdays were going to be difficult for you, huh, Julia, for a while.
So yeah, actually by then things are better. And we're taking a vacation the following week, the first week of July. So I think the last.
I skipped a whole month.
I'm not complaining, but I'm like,
Yeah.
Why am I? Okay, I just skipped a month. But still,
May is bad. You're right.
May is
So,
a bad month.
It is, but I
But
usually
so is
take
June.
time during
Well,
the day.
I'm looking at, see the Tuesdays, and I'm looking at May 25th would be a Wednesday.
That one looks okay right now. I have nothing on my calendar yet on that day.
Well, let's, huh?
there's that EDC thing that.
Oh,
It's at 5. That's the, I think. Is that, do I have that wrong?
Oh, the summit? No, the real estate.
The real estate.
I thought that was June 10th. Well, I guess I could look something.
Oh, you're right.
June 10th.
Why do I have something?
there's an EDC meeting at 7:30 that morning. Let's go ahead and schedule the 25th
Yeah.
at 4 o'clock. I was trying to go fast forward. I was looking at June. I skipped a whole month. And Maria's smiling at me a lot.
We can skip.
How come you didn't catch that?
I didn't want to say anything.
So we're saying Wednesday, May 25th at 4 PM?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so that way, that brings that up. And is there anything else that we should be bringing to the table?
Just as an update on a couple of things. So there's an item on the, and I just bring this up from the kind of an audit committee standpoint. So there's an item that's on the agenda for Tuesday night to authorize what's called a, they call it a shadow rating, but it's a issuer's credit rating. And it's one for us just to know, because the last time the general fund is what I'll call it, the city's financial wherewithal was last evaluated in 2015. And a lot's changed, obviously, in 7 years. In fact, rating agencies really want to have something in the last 12 months. And the reason that that becomes significant is because of any financing that the city might be looking at. We talked about pension obligation bonds. We have large scale capital projects that we're working on. And so if there's any, so as we're in negotiations or in discussions about potential funding for projects, it's been advised to have Standard & Poor's, who last did the rating of the city, update its rating to today from 15. And at that time it was AA. So I don't know, which is a good rating for, I might suggest it might be it might be AA plus for the city. So just as let you know that, and but that is on the council agenda for next Tuesday to authorize getting what's called a shadow rating. So basically it's, if we were to go out to the market, what would our rating be? So you know what it is.
Good.
As you're looking at terms. And then secondly, so not this meeting, but the next meeting, the markets are very volatile right now. But the pension or the pension funding policy and I would say the overall city's reserves policy will be subject to discussion at the May 17th meeting. So you'll be looking to add a new reserve fund, a pension funding reserve fund, as well as potential adjustments to your current ordinance as it relates to that. And that kind of came up in the study session for priority projects when we were talking about the catastrophic emergency fund, which has over $3 million in it right now. And could those funds be a better use in the community than being held in reserve? So, because you do have a good system, I would say, and that's why I think the shadow rating also helps. It tells you what your financial wherewithal is. We do know the one thing that's kind of we need to improve if there's two areas. One, having a pension funding policy and how to deal with your, as we spend a lot of time talking about, as well as the OPEB, the other post-employment benefits.
Okay.
So those are the two things when any of the state, fiscal health stuff comes out. Those are the two things that are kind of held against the city, is not having an organized chip away plan at its unfunded liabilities on PERS, as well as how it pays for its other post-employment benefits.
Thank you. Thank you for that. A lot. It's a lot. Okay. If there's nothing else that needs to be brought to the table, it is 4:47 and we will adjourn this meeting.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day, evening.
We'll,
Bye.